Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new around here, welcome. Happy to have you. Hope you decide to stick around, maybe like this video, subscribe if you want to see other videos about very exciting, fun topics like Big Four accounting, Big Four audit, career advice in general, because that's what we do around here. But yeah, so today I thought I would touch on something that I personally think is very important in that it's not touched on enough. At least I didn't think it was when I was going through the Big Four recruiting process, and that is, what does your life look like in public accounting outside of busy season? You know, because everyone wants to talk about busy season, busy season, busy season, busy season, and rightfully so, I think, because at the end of the day, you need to know what you're signing up for, and obviously, if you are completely unaware that you're going to have to work those hours for extended periods of time throughout the year, and that's not something you have any interest in, chances are it's not going to end very well for you or the firm. Now, with that being said, there is a lot to life at Big Four accounting outside of busy season, and again, I can't really speak too much to tax because I work in audit, so this video will be 100% my experience in audit. And if you're looking for tax, I'm sorry, I can't help you out there. Maybe there's someone else out there on YouTube that can, but yeah, this will be all about audit. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Life outside of busy season from an auditor's perspective at the Big Four. So I think there's several different things we can talk about when it comes to life outside of busy season. And those would be quarters, planning, walkthroughs, inventories, and time off. So first, let's go ahead and hop right into quarters. And quarters are a much welcomed change of pace compared to year end because you're ultimately not auditing anything. You know, when you're working on a quarter, it's just a quarterly review. You know, even if you have a public client that ultimately files a 10Q with the SEC, you're still not responsible for doing any sort of actual audit work. You know, so everything is much more high level. The hours tend to be much more manageable. It's typically a pretty short period of time, maybe anything over, it's typically like a week or two when it's all said and done. And yeah, it's just, you're not working as late. It's much more, again, high level. But that's not to say quarters aren't important, especially as it relates to your main client. If you're on a job where you're going to see all quarters throughout the year and then work on year end, because ultimately all the knowledge you gain throughout the quarters will make year end much more manageable because you're already going to be familiar with the data and information you're looking at. Something else I think I'll add about quarters is that if you're on a really good engagement team or a team that is doing their best to minimize the stress of busy season as much as possible, it's typically a pretty good idea to actually audit significant transactions that happen in any quarter as opposed to waiting till year end, right? So that's not to say that testing will live in your quarter work papers. It will still go into your year end work papers, but let's say, for example, your client had a very significant transaction in Q2, let's call it in May, Q2, right? So you're doing your Q2 review, and let's call it some point July and August. Obviously, the client has to be open to providing you support that an actual audit test requires, because again, it's much more detailed than what would typically be asked or needed as it relates to a quarterly review. But it makes much more sense to test it in a timely manner, right? Relatively quickly after the transaction happened, as opposed to waiting to your year-end testing, which could be as late as February or even March of the following year, if that makes sense, right? Because obviously if something happened just a month or two ago, chances are the client is going to be much more familiar with the transaction, with the details that are ultimately important to the test, which is just going to translate into better support, better conversations, and ultimately will translate into a better work paper for your engagement team and your year-end database. But again, I don't want to get too far into the details in any one of these topics. Truth be told, we can probably make individual videos about each and every one of these topics. And actually, if that's the case, please leave a comment down below about which topic you would like to hear a video on, and I'd be happy to go ahead and go a little bit more in depth than what I'm going to go into today. So moving on to the next area that I alluded to, and that would be planning. And planning is a different beast altogether, in that it technically is working towards that next year end. When you start working on planning, you will be working on work papers that will ultimately support your year-end audit opinion, which obviously tells you that planning is important. But I think planning can be challenging for a lot of people, and it is challenging for myself because it can be very tedious and very monotonous. A lot of planning centers around updating your understanding of the business. There's a lot of heavy documentation in there. It's very repetitive, especially if your client doesn't change a lot year over year. But it is very important because, again, you're updating the understanding of the business. You're having those conversations with the client about what you need to be aware of in order to ensure you take the best approach possible. Because I think the thing to consider with planning, as it relates to planning, is if you mess up planning, it ultimately will carry over to how you go about your year end. Or on the other side, if you do a very good job in planning, theoretically your year end should go much smoother than if you didn't take planning all that seriously. So yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say there, but let's talk now about another aspect of planning, but it can again be its own topic, and that is the topic of walkthroughs. Now, walkthroughs again tend to get a very bad rep with associates and people at the Big Four and public accounting in general, just because they are very tedious. The conversations are not exactly exciting. You're not going to watch the Avengers or anything along those lines. You're going to talk about granular processes, and we'll leave it at that. And then on top of that, after walkthroughs, documenting the walkthroughs and the information you obtained in there is not fun. It's just not. But again, walkthroughs are a very valuable time in that not only does it allow you to examine the key controls, which allows you to decipher maybe what areas are a little bit more risky, so where do you want to do a little bit more detailed testing, what areas are less risky, so how are you going to scope those out, and basically just formulating your overall audit approach. But also on a soft skills side, it allows you to have valuable one-on-one time with the client, ranging from the senior accountants on the job all the way up to directors of financial reporting, chief accounting officers, and individuals like that. And the reason why that's valuable is, especially if you're new on a job, so you're a first year or second year, it's a great opportunity for you to just show your face, have them get to know you a little bit more, which ultimately can just really facilitate the client relationship, and I think build a really good foundation that you'll see proves useful when you're working on quarters throughout the year, or especially year end. If they have that sense of familiarity with you that you guys built over walkthroughs, I think again it strengthens that client associate firm relationship, however you want to put it. Alright, so we already touched on quarters, planning, walkthroughs. I guess the next not fun thing to talk about is inventories. If you are a first year or second year or even third year associate, depending on your firm, your market, where you're located, the needs, all that kind of stuff, you should expect to be put on a probably good number, probably too many to count, or that you would like to admit, inventory observations. So expect to be waking up maybe a few Saturdays or random days throughout the week and waking up early, going to some warehouse to count frozen food in the deep freezer, or going to a mall to count jewelry at a store, or count clothes, whatever it may be. There is an off chance you could get a relatively interesting and cool inventory observation, but at the end of the day, it's still an inventory observation. They ultimately suck. I think a lot of people do not enjoy them as associates, and it's for good reason. But again, that's something we can probably talk about in its own video in and of itself. Finally, ending on a positive note, I think something that cannot be ignored, and I think this is one of the areas where the Big Four and public accounting really do excel, and that is time off. So especially Big Four firms, I can't really speak too much to any of the mid-tier or regional firms, but the flexibility is incredible. you are granted a lot of PTO and vacation time. That's not to say that you don't have to plan ahead to take your vacations, because you do. Because, again, another topic we can talk about is your schedule tends to get filled up pretty far out in advance. So if you want to take like a really long period of time off, like I know people in my office take a whole month off at a time, they let the deployment office or the people that do the scheduling for engagements know well in advance that they want to take that time off. But that's really getting away from the central point here, and that outside of busy season, there will be a lot of slow time. There will be time to take to yourself, whether it's vacations or if you're even slow time in the office and you want to learn a new skill, leverage something that ultimately you think can make your life a little bit easier come next busy season. It's a great opportunity to do that as well. But yeah, I think that's probably it. I feel like we could probably talk about a little bit more, but I think those are probably, when I think of my life outside of busy season, those are probably the 5 things that I think of the most, top of mind. So yeah, if you have any questions about anything I just went over, again, drop it in the comments. Or if you're an associate out there and you have a different experience outside of busy season, feel free to drop that in the comments as well. And I hope you enjoyed. And once again, I am still absolutely atrocious at wrapping videos up. So I will awkwardly just tell you, I will see you next time.